At the beginning of the movie, we meet an astronaut named John, who has just emerged from his hibernation pod. After freshening up, he heads to the control room of his spacecraft, where he meets his two co-pilots. All three of them are busy with the maintenance of the spacecraft as they prepare for their mission, to reach a distant planet and collect natural resources that can be brought back to Earth. The journey is expected to last around 9 years, and during such a long voyage, most of the crew spends their time in hibernation. Every 3 months, the astronauts wake up from their hibernation pods to check the spacecraft's maintenance systems and report their findings back to Earth. After completing these tasks, they return to hibernation for another 90 days. Adjusting to such extended periods of hibernation requires the use of special drugs. After one of these wake-up cycles, John appears confused. He mentions to Nash, one of his co-pilots, that he can't remember his girlfriend's full name or even what her voice sounds like. Nash reassures him that this is a side effect of the hibernation drugs, which can cause memory lapses, but assures him that his memory will return in time. After completing the system checks, John reports to Earth that everything on the spacecraft is functioning as expected. The crew is on the Slingshot trajectory, which will take them to Saturn's moon. Before going back to sleep, John reminisces about the first time he met his girlfriend, Zoe, who was both his colleague and mission trainer. He eventually remembers her full name and then returns to his hibernation pod. The next time the crew wakes up from hibernation, John is the first to regain consciousness. Feeling dizzy from the extended sleep, he sits down to stabilize himself. Suddenly, the spaceship experiences a violent jolt, and when John looks up, he sees a screw coming loose from the ceiling panel. The panel detaches and strikes John on the head, knocking him unconscious. When his two crewmates wake up, they find him unconscious and notice the damaged panel overhead. To understand what happened, the crew goes to the control room and reviews the CCTV footage. They discover that the spacecraft had sustained significant internal damage from the violent jolt. However, when they try to access information from the ship's computer about the extent of the damage, the system doesn't provide any details. This frustrates Nash, who becomes increasingly anxious, fearing that the ship's computer is malfunctioning and not providing crucial information in a life-threatening situation. Nash believes the spacecraft is no longer capable of completing the mission. He argues that if they continue on their current trajectory to Saturn's moon, they will likely die before they reach their destination. When John regains consciousness, Nash informs him of the situation, explaining that the ship has severe structural flaws and that their lives are in danger if they don't turn back. Nash has already discussed this with their captain, Frank, but Frank refuses to return to Earth. Nash then tells John that they have only one option: to wake up 12 hours before the next scheduled hibernation period, reprogram the ship, and use the catapult maneuver to redirect the spacecraft back toward Earth. John agrees with Nash, but only on the condition that he will first inspect everything himself. If he finds that there is indeed something critically wrong with the ship, only then will he help Nash carry out the plan. According to the plan, the next time the crew wakes up 12 hours earlier than scheduled. At this point, Nash is in a very bad state. He is extremely anxious, convinced that the ship's systems are no longer functioning properly and that they will all soon die. However, John calms him down and begins checking the entire system himself. According to his assessment, there is no issue with the ship that would warrant abandoning their mission. As they're discussing this, Captain Frank suddenly appears behind them, startling both John and Nash, as they still have much to do before they are ready. Captain Frank tells them that, during their last conversation in the kitchen, he overheard everything. Like them, he had also set his hibernation pod to wake him 12 hours early. Frank reassures John that there is no serious problem with the ship that would require them to cancel the mission, and John agrees. Frank promises that if any real issues arise, he will personally return the spacecraft to Earth. As they talk, Nash's condition worsens. He begins to panic, convinced that continuing the mission will result in their deaths and that they should return to Earth immediately. Frank steps in and forcefully calms him down. After a while, John also starts experiencing hallucinations, believing that his girlfriend Zoe is with him on the spacecraft. Although John knows she isn't there, his mental state is deteriorating, likely influenced by Nash's earlier words. In a confused state, John opens the ceiling panel to check for damage. As he enters the area, he sees countless stars shining. Before he can react, he notices sparks and severe damage. Part of the spacecraft is broken from the outside. The internal gravity system has failed, and the pressure from outside is pulling John toward the breach. Desperately, John holds onto parts of the spacecraft, trying to keep himself inside, but eventually, he loses his grip and falls into space. Just then, John regains consciousness and realizes that everything he just saw was a hallucination. The crew now prepares to return to their hibernation pods. When they wake up the next morning, they discover that they've reached a crucial point in their mission. They need to change their catapult, or trajectory, to continue their journey. Nash is still uneasy, feeling that something is wrong, but Captain Frank and John are determined to move forward with the mission. They perform the necessary calculations on their own and change the trajectory. The spacecraft experiences a violent jolt, and multiple alarms begin sounding. The system is overloaded, but Captain Frank refuses to abort the mission. He presses the button to continue. Nash believes they are about to die, but moments later, they successfully change their trajectory, much to their relief. It is a significant achievement, and they celebrate the success. For the next few days, they remain awake to monitor their course. John tries to keep himself occupied by exercising and staying busy, but his mental state continues to deteriorate, leading to more hallucinations. He keeps imagining Zoe behind him, though Captain Frank assures him that she is not on the spacecraft. Meanwhile, Nash's condition worsens as well. When John asks, Nash admits that he can no longer remember his parents' names or even their faces. He tells John, "How can I convince you that something is seriously wrong with me? I don't feel well, and I can't even understand simple numbers anymore." While they're talking, they call Captain Frank to the control room. Something is wrong with their calculations, which could alter their trajectory. John and Nash work together to correct the error. Nash then reveals that the low-level command reactor is failing, and that's what's causing all these problems. As John learns this, his condition worsens further. Captain Frank, realizing the gravity of the situation, pulls out a gun and forces them back into their hibernation pods, intending to complete the mission regardless of the dangers. John heads toward his pod, but before entering, he witnesses Frank torturing Nash. Frank attacked Nash with a gun, and Nash fell onto John's hibernation pod. After that, John couldn't see what happened because he went back to sleep. The next time John woke up, he couldn't see anything clearly. Suddenly, Captain Frank appeared behind him. John asked him about Nash, and Frank told him that Nash had become very unstable, so they had to lock him in a hibernation pod. After hearing this, John returned to his work, specifically the spacecraft's maintenance. While working, he noticed that his arm was strangely turning blue, perhaps due to the effects of the hibernation drugs. Suddenly, his arm turned black, and his vision blurred. His face contorted into a strange, alien-like form, which frightened John. But a moment later, he realized it was just another hallucination, and his arm was completely fine. These hallucinations continued, as they had before. John loved Zoe deeply, but Zoe wasn't physically there. Then Frank told him a painful truth. He and Zoe were never in a relationship. In reality, Zoe was John's mission trainer, and the company had asked her to meet with him in public spaces to assess his mental health and determine if he was fit for the mission. Hearing this, John became furious and shouted at Frank to stay out of his personal matters. Later, John returned to the control room to attend to the radio system, trying to focus on his work. However, memories of Zoe continued to haunt him. Lost in thought, someone suddenly contacted him over the radio, asking many questions. Before John could answer, he remained silent, and then Frank interrupted him. Frank told John it was time to return to the hibernation cycle. John didn't want to go back into hibernation, but he was curious to see how far Captain Frank would go to convince him. John locked Frank in the control room and demanded that Frank introduce him to Nash before he returned to the hibernation pod. Frank replied, "Listen to me, go to sleep now. Next time you wake up, I will introduce you to him. We won't wake him up until we reach Saturn's moon." Frank then tried to convince John to open the door, pointing a gun at him and forcing him toward the hibernation pod. John remembered how Frank had attacked Nash when he didn't listen. To protect himself, John tried to wrest the gun from Frank's hand, and a fight broke out. During the struggle, John broke Frank's nose, causing him to faint. John, now experiencing intense hallucinations, rushed back to the control room and searched the CCTV footage to find Nash. Before he could locate him, Frank returned and attempted to attack John. But John defended himself and beat Frank so badly that he died. Determined to figure out what was going on, John returned to the control room. He asked the AI about his crew members, and to his shock, he realized there were no other crew members on the ship. He was the only one. Upon asking for his full name, the AI revealed that his name was John Frank Nash. The two other characters, Frank and Nash, were mere hallucinations. When John realized that he had been hallucinating and was all alone on the ship, he broke down. He contacted the AI again, struggling to understand what was happening to him. The AI, responding as Zoe, explained that there had been a problem with the system, and John had received an overdose of hibernation drugs, which caused his hallucinations. Upon learning this, John told the AI that he no longer wanted to continue the mission and just wanted to return to Earth. But then he realized something even more shocking. He wasn't in space at all. He was inside a training facility designed to simulate space travel. This facility, built 1,000 feet underground, was created to test the effects of hibernation drugs and simulate space conditions. Confused and overwhelmed, John told Zoe that he could see Jupiter and the catapult in front of him, but Zoe explained that it was all part of his hallucination. We then learned that the initial ship damage John experienced, like the ceiling panel breaking, was caused by an earthquake in the facility. This earthquake also disrupted his communications with headquarters, which is why Zoe couldn't inform him about the drug overdose. Zoe told John that he could easily leave the facility through the airlock door. As John prepared to leave the facility, another man, Frank, appeared and warned him not to go outside. John, convinced that this was just another hallucination, ignored him and exited. Outside, he found a broken area with mechanical systems surrounding him. His radio encouraged him to trust that he would be rescued. But as he moved further, a monkey appeared, and John suddenly realized that everything he was experiencing was an illusion. In the final moments of the story, it is revealed that John was, in fact, on a space mission the entire time. The story ends abruptly as the truth of John's situation remains ambiguous.